you. And I live in a part of London where the population, it's 29% white, whatever the word white means, and 71% ethnic minority. And so if we're just looking at a Western way of thinking, with the amount of cultural diversity that there is in the UK, it's just not good enough to use only Western ways of thinking. So the talk today, I'm going to look about Spiritist assumptions of the virus in different cultures, because we've had so much information about the virus and so many different ways of thinking. And I'm going to look across different societies. Now, let me see if I can use the slide. It works. It's just magic, isn't it? Okay, so the kinds of things I'm looking at, I did research in India. I went 15 times or so, had 2 projects, one in Tamil Nadu and another in central India. And then I'm also going to look at case studies from South America and Africa and Asia. And I'll look at the question about the unquiet dead that people talk about and hungry ghosts and the different treatment strategies. So the kind of people that I'll be looking at today are psychiatrists, psychologists, clairvoyants, psychics, shamans, spirits of the dead, therapists, and anthropologists. So it's a bit of a mixture. And when I started working on this last year, I saw a couple of articles published in the journal Nama, New Approaches to Medicine and Health, which is published in India from Pondicherry. And they gave me a kind of starting point to look at people's relationship to the virus. And I wanted to explore how people believed spirits related to the virus and what was the relevance for hungry ghosts. And I wondered if a deeper understanding of spirits and hungry ghosts might help people to better understand issues around the illness and distress and death. And so before I look at hungry ghosts, I want to consider the writings of the mother in Pondicherry. She was the consort of Sri Aurobindo, and she was born in Paris to Egyptian and Turkish parents. And she was deeply clairvoyant and had clairvoyant insights around the world. I'm getting used to technology, so we may need to be patient with me. So the work that I did in India, I wrote the book Spiritual Psychiatries, and it was based on field work. I had interviews with patients, psychiatrists, philosophers and clairvoyants. And I looked at the way people used religion to look at mental distress, the perambulations they did around the temple and around the mosques. And I wanted to find out if there was any relevance in the spiritual, in the practices that they did. Was there any relevance for us in the Western world? And the mother, she visited Japan in 1919 after World War I, and it was at the time of an epidemic, like similar to the one we have now, and she saw a lot of panic, and it killed many people. and there was an atmosphere of constant fear. And she said, people were seen walking about in the streets with a mask on the nose, a mask to purify the air they were breathing, so that it might not be full of microbes of the illness. And that was in 2019. And while there, she fell under attack from the virus, and her psychic insight showed her, I saw clearly a being with part of the head cut off in a military uniform, or the remains of a military uniform, approaching me and suddenly flinging himself upon my chest. And she called on all her power to heal the illness. And she said, microbes are forces of disintegration. She said, I had understood that the illness originated from beings who had been thrown out of their bodies. I had seen this, she said, during the First Great War, towards its end, when people used to live in trenches and were killed by bombardment. They were in perfect health, altogether healthy, and in a second they were thrown out of their bodies, not conscious that they are dead. They did not know that they hadn't got a body anymore. This may be familiar to people who work as mediums or psychics. And when I was working in India, I met a psychiatrist who's still alive, Dr. Sumitra Basu, and he lives in Pondicherry, and he felt that the Western model of psychiatry was not appropriate for Indian beliefs about the nature of existence, because he said there was an underlying assumption in Western traditions that people were influenced only by postnatal experiences rather than by past lives or the planets or karma or parapsychological influences or supernatural influences. So he said Western psychiatry was not appropriate. And he's prepared articles in a book. I'm glad to hear about Dr. Alexander's book. This is a book that's coming out later this year, written by two psychiatrists, Sumitra Basu and Michael Miovic. And it's called Consciousness-Based Psychology, Integral Yoga and Transpersonal Growth in Sri Aurobindo's Worldview. And Dr. Basu suggests that the virus and bacteria are gateways through which hostile forces may invade individuals and populations. And he said there were interactions between epidemics, occult forces. And in 1919, the Spanish flu claimed 50 million lives globally. So I went to India as a medical anthropologist, and I use the data from where the countries that I visited and when I did research with migrant and refugee groups in the UK. And I use this to teach in the medical schools, to teach medical students to raise awareness of different ways of understanding health, particularly mental health, but also physical health. Dr. Basu said that there were occult forces behind COVID-19, behind the current pandemic that we're experiencing. And he had an experience last year when he was woken from sleep by an entity which seemed to be a vital force behind the pandemic, which gripped his arm tightly. And he began to feel that he was collapsing and his legs were being immobilized. And at that time, last year, he wanted to pray for help, but he realized that he couldn't. And then suddenly the vital force released him from its clasp, and then he could invoke grace. And from this experience, he understood that he'd been shown how people succumb in fear to COVID-19 even before any organic damage occurs. And I've got a picture here of licorice all sorts, in case anybody likes licorice all sorts. I use it because the explanations that we hold for illness and mental distress are like licorice all sorts. We choose whichever fits with our current beliefs, our current knowledge base. And I found there are always multiple narratives about health. And I've just given us a range of explanations about the causes of illness. So it can be biological, could be religious, everything explained by contact with a god or deity, or psychological, the experiences of past trauma, or spiritual, opening to the divine or other states of consciousness, or it can be spiritist, relating to supernatural beings or dark forces or psychic attack. So there's a range of explanations for illness. Now I'm shifting quickly from India to an example in South America. And the example I give here is Dr. Alberto Viodo. He was a medical anthropologist. He studied in San Francisco State University, and he was a psychologist, and he observed shamanic healing practices in Amazon and the Andes. And he studied with shamans who mastered the journey beyond death, and with healers who treated the luminous energy field surrounding the body in order to prevent illness from physically manifesting. And he said, he wrote, shamanic healers don't distinguish cancer, diabetes, or heart disease in their cosmology. They see these conditions and many others as symptoms of a spiritual illness. And he said, there's no difference between being killed by a jaguar or being killed by a microbe. To Westerners, being killed by a microbe is an illness, whereas being eaten by a jaguar is an accident, pure bad luck. And he said the wisdom keepers know that they have to be in sacred relationship with jaguars and microbes alike, or else they'll both look at him as dinner. And the shamans there, they say the visible and invisible worlds are inextricably intertwined. Something that Vanessa said as mediumship is a natural faculty. And he said the shaman does not believe in a division between the body and the spirit, or between the visible world of form and the invisible world of energy. With one spirit medicine, we discover how to dance between the visible, physical world of the senses and the invisible world of spirit. And in Brazil, those of you may be familiar with the work of Dr. Emma Bragdon, who did research interviewing psychiatrists and shamans, and she illustrates the practice in her book, Spiritism and Mental Health. And also in South America, looking at the Colombia region, was a book written by an Australian anthropologist, Geraldo Reichel Dolmatov. And he said there, the concept of disease is closely related to environmental sustainability. So shamans are the healers. Sickness is a penalty which serves as a mechanism to enforce rules about ecology. Illness is seen as the ecologically inadequate behavior of the patient. And I'm wondering if we had that perspective in the West about what we're doing to the environment, would that seem relevant? So he said, sickness is a direct consequence of a person having upset the ecological balance, and he or she is said to have caused the disease. And it's also, the shamans don't operate at an individual level like the doctors and the healthcare professionals here. They work to assess which part of the ecosystem has been disturbed. And this concept around illness serves to establish rules to address overhunting, polluting the water, depletion of plants, and overpopulation. And I'm swiftly moving from South America to Africa and on to Asia. I just wanted to show that there's a commonality of this natural faculty that people have, that we've kind of ignored. People that haven't got the technology that we have in the West. This is a book was research done by British anthropologist Victor Turner. And when people became ill, he wrote, their first explanation was that ancestral spirits had been disturbed by their behavior. So sickness was also caused if a taboo was broken or by quarreling with kin. So during a public ritual to release a man from troubling ancestral beings, the participants spoke all his troubles aloud. I'm just wondering if this understanding of sickness and environment, we're taking that on now in the West. We're a bit behind with how these simpler societies in Africa and South America were. And then during a ceremony, it was acceptable for secret grudges and animosities to be spoken. So speaking private matters in public allowed the angry spirit which had caused the sickness a gateway to leave. And we're shifting from Africa to Tibet and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. There was a film done of that book called The Great Liberation. And it was a book showing a Buddhist Lama and his novice guiding a dying man into the afterlife. And they said 49 days of prayer to release the dead or dying person from their attachments in this life. And so they had 49 days of prayer. So they made sure that people didn't hang around in the earth's plane. And so there are some societies where they really acknowledge the role of ancestral spirits, the role of ecology and environment, and the unquiet dead. But I just wanted to look quickly at who are the unquiet dead, who are the hungry ghosts. And in Japan, there's ghosts of the dead that can be found in graveyards or a place where death happened. And they tend to wear the same clothing as when they died. And they may haunt a place or a person, but they may be reluctant to accept their death and can bring misfortune on others. And books have been written about the unquiet dead. This one's by Dr. Edith Fiore. And she said, the unquiet dead can be spirits of people who die suddenly, who do not know they are dead. They may roam around on Earth's plane and may attach to the living, causing illness and mental distress. And then this concept of hungry ghosts, they're found from the Far East, the Philippines, to Japan, China, Thailand, Laos, Burma, India, and Pakistan. They're universally described as human wraiths-like wraiths with mummified skin, narrow withered limbs, grossly bulging stomachs, and long thin necks and tiny mouths. And they were hungry ghosts, unable to take in or assimilate what they desperately needed. The problem lies in their constricted throats, which cannot open for nourishment, and so they wander aimlessly in search of relief that is not forthcoming. And hungry ghosts, they may be the wider collateral of war alongside human diseases. And there is a special month in China at Vietnam where the hungry ghosts come out and people lay food by the roadside for them as offering. So they're beings that are driven by intensely emotional needs. But they enter human space during the months of July. And this book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, was written by physician Gabor Mate. And during the Second World War, his grandparents were killed by the Nazis. So he felt his parents' intense grief as a child. And he was aware people who had addictions had lived through great trauma, violence, and loss. And writing about the book, Hungry Ghost Realm, and I don't think he mentioned Spiritism, but it seems to be a similarity where the domain of addiction, where we're constantly seeking something outside ourselves to curb an insatiable yearning for relief or fulfillment. We don't know what we need, and so as long as we stay in the hungry ghost mode, we'll never know, and we haunt our lives without being fully present. And I wonder if practitioners see people with that kind of similarity. So I've got a couple of slides just on war and hungry ghosts. And my proposition is that war creates a wider collateral than soldiers, their victims, and any bereaved relatives. And spirits of people who die suddenly, who do not know they're dead, may roam around and may attach to the living, causing mental distress. And so in Pondicherry, the mother at Sri Aurobindo's ashram and the psychiatrist, Dr. Vasu, who also had psychic visions, she was informed that soldiers who were killed but didn't know they died were also the cause of virus illnesses. So living people may spontaneously access the trauma of earthbound entities, exacerbating any mental health problems. And I just wanted to finish by looking quickly at treatment strategies and what we can do and what's enough. So what can we do to address human distress? We've heard about lots of examples here on this Congress of practitioners, but I'm wondering what kind of treatment strategies are useful. And of course, it depends on people's belief about the causes of the virus. So obviously one strategy is vaccination and masks, and another one is perhaps to stop creating war, to stop creating spirits of beings who don't know they're dead, to stop othering other people or wanting their territory or environmental resources. And I just wondered, is it enough to consider psychology alone, or do we need more than believing it's something just in the head? Is it enough for it that we use one-to-one therapy, because that's a very Western strategy of healing? Or is it enough to assume that problems just come from thoughts in the head and not from any other kind of spiritist attachment? Is it enough to treat the body on its own, or apply mechanistic solutions to illness and viruses? Or, for example, CBT, if it addresses thoughts as if they are the responsibility of the holder's mind and emotions, but they have nothing to do with a spiritist type thought intrusion. So we do need therapists who address negative thoughts and behaviors, but also practitioners who have the natural faculties and aware of spiritist perspectives. We do need both and, because otherwise we may have treatment that targets emotions or thought forms in the head when spirits can hook on to a person and create further distress. So we need both and. And the book by the two psychiatrists, by Dr. Sumitra Basu and Dr. Michael Miovic, they offer a fusion of traditional Indian knowledge about consciousness alongside Western understandings, and they identify key differences between Eastern and Western scholars. They cover issues around reincarnation, past lives, spirit possession, strategies for addressing hostile forces. And they tackle the kind of things which may make Eurocentric therapists uneasy. But I think we do need this material coming from psychiatrists. I'm told it'll be published later this year. And my question is it enough just to acknowledge the virus on its own? Is it enough just to use hand gel and masks and vaccinations and still sell weapons for mass killing of people? Or do we need to rethink our morality? My feeling is obviously we need multiple responses, and I think that's what we've heard from this Congress here. And it would be perhaps we could learn how to stop the violence or acknowledge the damage that war does to humans. And perhaps we need to offer prayers and offer and honor everybody that's incarnate and in spirit. So the treatment strategies that I think we've heard about today is prayer, intention, focus, working together as a group in order to promote healing and training to change the paradigm inside medical schools and hospital, to raise awareness that there's other ways of working. I have been teaching the last 15, 16 years to medical students, and they are much more aware these days that there's different ways of thinking. It's not the struggle like in the old days. So the times are changing. And this, it happens, is my last slide. So thank you. I hope I've kept to time, and thank you for listening.
Yes, you have kept beautifully to time, and what a wonderful talk. It really broadens one's horizon, makes one think that we must get out of our Western silo. We've actually got to think much wider than we are at the moment. Natalie, that was stunning. Now, who has some questions for Natalie? Are there any?
I did see a couple come up.
Yeah. Did you come across the use of plant medicines, Ethogens, by shamans in your study? Interesting question. And what is your understanding of what this might offer us?
I didn't come across plant medicines. It happened, Jeanette, that in 1997, when I already had a doctorate in something or other, someone was giving a talk in ayahuasca at a conference. I was talking at it and I was chairing some session. And they were talking on ayahuasca. And I'd been doing all sorts of shamanic this and that. And I saw the spirit of the ayahuasca plant. And it smiled at me and it said, stop all your experiential work, register for medical anthropology, do another degree, and find a language to question the old system of healthcare. So that's my only experience, but I actually haven't taken ayahuasca. I don't drink alcohol or even tea and coffee very much, but I haven't encountered myself people who use that medicine. Thank you, Jeanette. And Joe Dot.
Natalie, do you think some of the distress might also be caused by animals who have died suddenly, not just humans? And this is exactly what we're doing with all our meat eating on this planet.
Oh, God, I've just had to mark an essay on that. In India, they have a theory that animals that are taken as pets are individualized and then reincarnate as humans next time round. And it may be that this kind of factory farming that we're doing, that it can influence us.
Okay. Well, no, I think that's an interesting point. But don't forget that on the farms, the farmers, in fact, have a relationship with their animals. So it's a difficult one. And here we have question to Natalie. What about the illness of shamans? For part of psychiatric patients were shamans who ignore themselves. Yes. How to ground these energies? Nice one for you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, there was, in the old days, there was the thought that the shamans were really psychiatric patients, but they went through and they acknowledged that their skills. And I think there are groups of people now with spiritual awakening and spiritual crisis where they feel they've had problems and they may be shamans in waiting. But the problem comes if you open yourself to all your natural faculties, that you can be hypersensitive of the energies that are around. And it may be okay for a shaman to do that thing who's familiar, or a medium who's well controlled. It's just, I was told very clearly, Natalie, you're too sensitive. Don't mess with it. Stop doing all of that kind of work and go back to college. But I think there is a link.
Interesting. And you believe that, and it was obviously just right for you. Here's one from Stephen. Yeah. During your researches, which treatment makes more sense to you?
I think the question for me, Stefan, is it's a combination. It's always a combination. You need the psychology, the psychiatry. The psychiatrist in India, they believed that, or he believed that an illness, psychosis, was an event. It wasn't a disease of the brain for life. And so he did offer medication, but he reduced the dose. but he also offered prayer and rituals around the temple. So I think the question is, I don't know that there's a single treatment. I think it's a multiple. We need to work with a multiple of therapists and remedies. And I think the only people who can change the old-fashioned psychiatry is psychiatrists themselves.
Yes, it always goes back to the group, doesn't it? Thank you, Stephen, for that. And any other questions for Natalie? Well, in fact, we have a few minutes. Natalie, that was the most stunning talk, and you've obviously gone into this question of the relationship between the virus and mental health and physical health in the planet. Do you feel that there is a connection yourself, because you're a Westerner? We're brought up not to look quite so widely, although you, of course, in your training will do so.
I feel we need to look that widely. We need, I brought up those examples where illness was seen as the damaging behavior to the resources or the environment, because at some level I believe it. I think we're not, we're using sticking plasters approach for the virus, but we're still selling arms to certain countries. We're still benefiting financially. And that doesn't make sense to me, that we should go around in masks, take vaccination and continue to sell bombs. It just doesn't fit with me. So, yeah, so I believe it.
Oh, I think that's so wise. I think the whole idea of exporting arms to other countries so that they can kill themselves while we sit here protected with our atom bombs is absolutely crazy. Sonia, that was Natalie. That was an absolutely wonderful talk. Really enjoyed it, and thank you very much for giving it. And just to say how nice it is to have your thinking and your thought on the committee of the new BSMA. Thank you, Nat.